Great. Okay. So today's going to be a little bit different than normal. We're still going to start with our typical passage identification quiz, but I do think that we're getting to a point where, remember sort of in the beginning of like a couple months ago when we all first started meeting, I talked about how with reading comprehension, most people, when they struggle, fall into like one of two camps. So you're either in the camp where you're having a really hard time identifying what type of passage, what's relevant to pull from it, and you're almost getting like stuck in time traps. And that's really what the passage identification has been for, what the checklist has been for, the roadmap, like all of this, as well as those like sentence summaries and sort of like the setup, like how should you be setting up reading comp to make sure you're moving through in a timely manner. But then the second half of like people who kind of struggle with reading comp, and this is the other area, is when it comes more to the questions themselves. And so with that, really, if you're struggling with that aspect, like you feel like you're doing a really good job of understanding the passage, you're moving pretty quickly, but you're getting stuck on maybe like two answer choices and you're not seeing the difference. Like what that says is that the skill that you should be really working on is finding proof to support your answer choice, because there's really only going to be one answer choice that is supported from the text. And similar to any of the ideas that you're getting from Nicole's reading comp, or not reading comp, but like Nicole's boot camp, or if you even just took like a one-off class with Nicole, the idea that we're looking for like weak answer choices that are easily supported. So really what we're going to do today is we're going to do one reading comp identification just because it's tradition. And then I was trying to think of the best way to do it, but I'm going to put the passages that we're going to do today in the chat. Like I took screenshots of them and then I'll also have them up on my screen. But really the focus of today is where's the proof coming from? And so we're going to spend more time looking at a passage, looking at the questions and really like finding our proof. Because the way that I recommend getting better at the skill, if this is sort of the camp you fall in for reading comp, is to do an untimed passage where you sit there and you have to highlight like all of your proof for each answer choice. And it's meticulous. It takes a really long time. However, like I think what's good about it is it shows you the level of proof you're looking for. Because I think we know that we're looking for an answer choice that's supported, but there's a lot of kind of traps, and we'll see that today, where they'll use familiar language to kind of trap us into picking and being attracted to a certain answer choice. Some questions require like essentially explicit proof versus implicit proof. And so it's kind of navigating all that. So that's the focus of today. So look at this, and then we're going to do our typical passage identification quiz. I'll give until 11:10, but read this and then try to identify whether it is persuasive, informative, or cost benefit. If it's persuasive or informative, what is the thesis? If it's cost benefit, what is the topic being debated? And then put that in the chat, and I'll put the directions in the chat. Okay, in our final minute, I'm gonna put the screenshots in the chat. If you would prefer to just have it up on your own, it's going to be we're gonna be looking at practice test 30. And then we're gonna look at the first passage as well as the fourth passage. So I'm gonna put these screenshots in the chat. If everyone could just either pull up on your own whatever way you have access to the prep tests, or if not, just confirm that you are able to open these. So that's going to be the fourth passage. And then I'm going to share the second passage in the chat as well. So if everyone can just like privately to me either say, yes, the screenshots worked, or yes, the screenshots worked, or I'm just using my own. That way I know that we all have access and we get into it, because this is the only identification quiz we're doing. Perfect. Okay. So while you're working on that, everyone correctly identified. So this is going to be informative. So remember, when we're looking at a passage, the first question we should ask ourselves is, do we have like a very prominent author? And so we're going to identify that prominent author using the same tools and techniques that we do to identify the main point when we're looking at LR. So we're looking for those indicator words such as since, thus. We're also looking for some sort of, for it to be persuasive and to know that we have a strong author, we're looking for some sort of, I call it like a universal truth, or just some big topic that the author is dissenting from. So if you have that, it's very easy to recognize that that is persuasive. Here, we don't have a broad opinion that the author is differing from. So it's not as though, like, normally in the context of like this style of a paragraph, we might see something like, critics say that Romar Bearden was untalented and didn't contribute enough to the artistic community. And then this would turn and say, however, the paintings of Romar Bearden represent a double triumph. Like here, we don't have that. We only have essentially like one argument. We're not seeing the author dissent. So we know it's definitely not persuasive. So if it's not persuasive, we only have two other options. We either have informative, where the author is just trying to teach us something, or we've got cost benefit, where we're going to have some sort of topic that the author is going to let kind of duke it out. And then just like a judge in a legal opinion, the author is going to pick a side in the end. And so that's why our main point for a cost benefit is going to come from the last paragraph, as opposed to in informative and persuasive, where it's coming from the first. Here, and the main way that we can differentiate the two, remember, is the ownership of the facts. So here, the author is just saying these statements as absolutes. The paintings of Romar Bearden represent a double triumph. If this were to be a cost benefit, we would need something that would shift this opinion to another person. So maybe critics feel the paintings of Romar Bearden represent a double triumph. That would show that, okay, the author hasn't inserted himself into this opinion, so we can't quite say he's trying to teach us something. It's more he's trying to maybe say how differing people view a topic. So because we have absolute statements, that shows that the author is taking ownership. And so we know that this is an informative passage, and the thesis is super simple, just that first sentence. If you wanted to, like on your paper, if you were doing an untimed, if you wanted to maybe expound upon the idea of double triumph and maybe say the thesis is, the author's trying to teach us that Romar Bearden's paintings represent innovative painting techniques and exploring the African-American experience, to kind of give some concrete terms to double triumph, that's fine. But if not, the first sentence is perfect. Great. Okay, so that's it for just our reading identification quiz, because I do want to make sure that we're getting into questions. So no one has said that there's a problem with the screenshots, so I'm going to assume that everyone is able to access this prep test. If that is not the case, absolutely let me know. Also, I'm a big fat liar. It's not PT30, it's actually PT35. So sorry if that confused anyone. That is totally on me. Okay, so I'm gonna bring it up on mine, but really, like, what I would love for you to do is on the screenshots, if you opened them, the annotate feature of your computer, like on that screenshot, like what I'm really looking for is for you to be able to engage with it. So really be able to underline or circle or somehow engage with it. I'll do it on my end, but obviously it's like a personal experience. I'll also allow advanced sharing options so that people are able to use it online. But let's get into it. Great, so this is the one we're gonna start with. So we're gonna very quickly, I'm gonna kind of move us along a little bit faster than usual. So I want us to go paragraph by paragraph, and I'm gonna give 4 minutes in between each, and then we're gonna come together kind of, so in the chat for this first paragraph, I want you to read it and do the same thing we just did. So identify what type of passage it is and identify either the thesis or what topic is being debated. So go, and then we'll come back at 11:19 to discuss that. And as usual, I would recommend either having a piece of paper or having some sort of empty Word document open so that you can practice like the untimed roadmap idea of writing the thesis at the top. And I'll put these directions in the chat. We'll be back at 11:19. All right, it's 11:19. Again, I apologize for rushing anyone, but I do want to make sure we're getting to the questions. So we're reading this, and what we're getting is like a lot of background information in this first paragraph. So that's why like I really recommend, I know in our passage identification quizzes, you really only have access to the first paragraph, but when you're doing this in practice, like you should always read the first sentence of the second paragraph just to make sure that there's not some sort of dramatic shift. Because as we see here, this is a perfect example of one where there is. So at first, we're getting a lot of background information about how there was 80 memoirs that were published after the French Revolution. Um, and so, and they kind of give like reasons why that might be the case. Like, was it their privilege? Was it for political reasons? And then, but we're not quite sure like where this is going. Because again, we don't really have a strong author thesis statement. We don't have a but, since we don't have like a broad opinion and a dissent. So it doesn't feel like a persuasive passage. Um, but at the same time, like we are getting some maybe like pushback as to like reasoning why, like we're not quite sure where this is going. Like we're getting some reasons why like maybe that sample of women who wrote was biased. And we don't necessarily have, and all these statements so far have been in absolutes. So it definitely maybe sounds a little more informative, but we're missing that like core thesis. However, this first sentence of the second paragraph really puts things into perspective, and that's really like the key of what this passage is going to be about. Because the memoirs were written so long after the events they described, some historians question their reliability. Okay, so this is when we see that it's actually going to be cost benefit, because now we have this idea that like the author isn't saying that they're not reliable. The author is throwing it on to critics. And so now putting everything into perspective, we see that this is cost benefit. We're not going to be evaluating the reliability of these memoirs written by women after the French Revolution. And we now see that this first paragraph was really giving us the background information that kind of like goes towards the argument that no, they're not going to be reliable. And those two reasons really are the political reasons, because they're published after the revolution. So obviously, if it's after the revolution, like why are people going to be, when everything's stabilized, like people aren't going to necessarily be writing pro-revolution when everything's stabilized. That there could be some risks, as well as the privilege. So maybe it's not a full sample size because only like the upper class could read and write easily. So the statement on the top of your blank piece of paper or your blank Word document should be, are the published women written memoirs from the French Revolution reliable? That's our question. And then we have like the two kind of arguments that are going to pigeonhole into the no that come from the first paragraph, which is political reasons and then the privilege. Great. Okay, so now read the second paragraph. And remember, what we're going to do here is we're trying to look for like 10 words that sort of sum up what this paragraph does to advance the cost benefit analysis of whether or not the works are reliable. So we'll come back at 11:26. So read that, and then in the chat, put your 10 words that kind of say what this does to advance the author's goal. All right, so looking at the second paragraph, we really see, at first, we have an argument about like the sequence, about it was written so far away, the reliability, all that, introducing our issue. However, what this paragraph really does to advance the goal is it shows like two ways that scholars have been able to evaluate whether or not the information is reliable. So for this one, like the statement that I wrote was, this paragraph shows how scholars can evaluate reliability, and then under that I just had multiple accounts and then plausibility. Great, super simple. So again, for this, we're more making ourselves like a roadmap so that we're able to come back and know where information came from, which becomes helpful when we do questions in terms of speed. But you're not looking for anything crazy, crazy detailed. All right, so now we're on our final paragraph. So because we identified this as cost benefit, we know that we're looking for our thesis in this final paragraph. And so that thesis is going to be what the author chooses. So through this paragraph, we should be able to find whether or not the author feels the published memoirs are reliable, or at least have some sort of conclusion on that. So we'll be back at 11:31. So read that and then put your like 10-word summary in the chat, keeping in mind that you're going to have to find the answer to that question. All right, everyone. So again, so in this paragraph, we're introduced um, I'm just gonna call him Dennis. Yeah, so Michael, what you wrote was perfect. Sorry, gonna brag on you for a second. So I'm just gonna call him Dennis. Maybe it's Denise. Who really knows? Who really knows? But anyway, so in this paragraph, really what we're getting is the author is bringing in this expert essentially to say that like this expert has applied the criteria listed in the second paragraph, so the idea of cross-checking and plausibility, applied it. So in this whole paragraph, we're talking about the activism present, like he's basically like hitting the two criteria mentioned in the second paragraph, and then showing that because he like his research checked out, the author in the statement, in the final statement, is saying Bertholt's study attests to the credibility of these accounts. So the author is saying like this expert has applied the test above, and so it attests to the credibility. It attests to the credibility. So we can say that the author like is siding towards the camp of yes, these works are reliable because they've passed the analysis. Yeah, great. So again, like let's do our quick little rundown before we go into the questions. Paragraph 1, it's giving us background information about potentially why these sources aren't credible. Second paragraph introduces the issue, so the credibility of these memoirs, as well as gives the criteria of how scholars are able to evaluate credibility using multiple accounts and the plausibility of the events. And then finally, in the last paragraph, we've got the author brings in an expert that applies that criteria and rules that it does make sense. So the author is saying that this adds credibility, and so we can rely on their accounts. Perfect. All right, so now that we've got that, let's go into the questions. Okay, so I hope everyone has access to the passage. If not, I'd be happy to try resending them. So reach out to me. So which one of the following completely inaccurately, I'm going to try to minimize this. Which one of the following most completely and accurately states the main idea of the passage? This is really like something that our roadmap helps us out with. So because we did our roadmap, like we kind of have a prediction of what we're hoping to see. So the author has decided that it is credible using the criteria about like the cross-referencing and the plausibility. So we know we're looking for an answer choice that says like the memoirs written by the women from the French Revolution like are credible. So we're looking for something there, and then maybe something that ties in either some of the critics' arguments or some of the reasons that Bertholt used to validate that. So look at this question. I'll scroll down in a minute and then put your answer in the chat and then try to have it in by 11:37. All right, so this is something I kind of wanted to share. So a part of, and sorry for kind of divulging into another point, but yes, the answer is C. That's the one that best translates. But in at my program, we have a class where it was called like Introduction to the Study of Law. And we talked about like multiple choice questions and the idea behind like multiple choice questions in like a legal atmosphere and or in like law school. And one of the things the professor said is that there's only like a couple ways that a multiple choice question can be wrong. And I think like there is a lot of crossover with that in reading comp and in law. So some of it's obviously not going to translate. So his whole theory was it can be wrong as a matter of law. So let's say the elements for battery or for assault like requires three things. Um, if they say something that's not one of those elements, that's wrong as a matter of law. Second is wrong as a matter of fact, like the facts just didn't say that. So, and then third is like wrong in terms of scope. So it's like, it's not even relevant to what's happening. And then the last one is too like overly broad. So here, like obviously we're not really going to get the law aspect too much, but I think it's really good to think about things as, is it wrong as a matter of fact? Like, did that just literally not happen in the passage? And then looking at scope, like, is it relevant to why we're here? And then finally, is it like overly encompassing or potentially under encompassing? So if we're looking at this, like we can kind of put them into buckets here. Despite the attempts of some historians to discredit them, women's memoirs reflect French society's intolerance towards women involvement. That's wrong as a matter of fact, because here we have multiple instances of social activism. So that has to be gone. Even though the studies have yet to draw any definitive conclusions about the factual accuracy, again, wrong as a matter of fact. Like he literally, we brought in an expert to kind of attest to it. So how can this be true? Although written year, so C becomes our answer, so we're going to leave that alone. D, because of the natural tendency of memories to distort facts and partisanship to bias accounts, it is unlikely that women memoirs of the French Revolution can be relied upon to convey an accurate portrait of the events of the period. So this one's a little tricky, but this is like what I would say is an example of under-inclusive. So this is one of the arguments, or we could say that this is out of scope, but this is one of the arguments about like why they're not credible. But throughout the second, like in the second paragraph, the author shows two ways to test reliability. So just because this is true doesn't mean that that like shows that we can't look at the reliability of the memoir. So this is under inclusive. Like, yes, it is a point, but it's no longer relevant because the author addresses it in two ways. So that one's gone. Finally, regardless of their reliability, women's memoirs of the French Revolution are nevertheless a valuable resource. This is out of scope because, well, it's out of scope and it's wrong as a matter of fact, because we are saying they're reliable. But this, like our whole passage is focused on whether or not the memoirs are reliable. And this is saying regardless of their reliability, like why this is so like, if they're not reliable, they're not reliable. We don't care about just because they're not reliable can still does this. Like the only question we care about is the reliability of it. And so this is no longer relevant because we don't care. Like this, we don't care about this. We don't care about their use outside of their reliability. So just if like you're struggling with questions, I think that's like a fun way to think about it is like, how is this trying to make me wrong, as well as a good way when you're doing your wrong answer journals and you're looking at sort of the answer that you chose, like why was it wrong? And then what aspect of it made it wrong? I think like that's a kind of a cool way to look at it. Okay. Based on the passage, which one of the following can most reasonably be inferred about the majority of published memoirs of the French Revolution that were written by men? Okay. So this is an example of what I said, like when it comes to proof from the passage, there's questions that are going to ask for explicit proof, and then there's going to be passages that ask questions that ask for like implied truth. So a good way to look at it is if in Nicole's bootcamp or if any of your classes you've looked at like most strongly supported questions, that's exactly what we're looking for here. We're looking for information that's maybe not explicitly in the text. However, we have enough to get there. So when we're looking at this, I'm gonna have, so this is where I want us to do our first instant of like finding our first instance of really like looking and highlighting your proof from the passage. So what I'm going to challenge you to do, like when you're doing this, is the first question you should ask yourself when you look at a question is we're gonna predict. So the first question you should ask yourself is, where on my roadmap do I think I learned this information? So here, based on the passage, which one of the following can most reasonably be inferred about the majority of the published memoirs of the French Revolution that were written by men? So the first question you should ask yourself is, looking at our roadmap, is where am I the most likely to have learned about background information about memoirs and the French Revolution? So ask yourself that question, and then that should direct you to where you're looking for your answer. So let's come back at 11:45, and I would like everyone to put their answer choice and then like type the first 3 words of the sentence that led you to that answer choice. Everyone got it right. Great job, everyone. Perfect. And everyone perfectly like found the proof. So I hope this was like a good exercise to kind of see where, like how we find our answers. So here, the idea, like where do we learn about like background information about memoirs? That should have directed you to that first paragraph because we established that they're giving us background info. From here, like what do we learn about these memoirs? We know that at the time, only half the French citizens could read, and only members of the upper class were able to write easily. And so that perfectly relates to they were written by members of the upper class. So see how, even though it's not explicitly written that that all male memoirs were written by members of the upper class, like just because we don't explicitly have like those 3 words, we have so much proof. Like the only members of the upper class are able to read easily. Well, if only members of the upper class were able to read easily, that means no members of the lower class were able to write easily. Like only members can, like it thus follows that if there are male members that wrote the memoirs, they had to have been from the upper class. So I hope that was a good exercise in kind of like how proof translates. Great. Okay, so now we're going to do the next one. Great job, everyone. All right, the passage's reference to Madame de la Villerue is most likely intended to. Okay, so the way, like this question is going to resemble the same kind of skills you used in like rule in the reasoning or method of reasoning questions, depending on like what terminology you use. So really what you're asking yourself is you're going to find the paragraph where this is coming from. So here we're talking about the 3rd paragraph, like collectively this sentence. And so I really want you to, So I really want you to read that sentence, look at your roadmap in terms of like, what was the goal of that paragraph? And then try to resolve them and think about what did the, like, what, so almost we have our thesis, our paragraphs. The reason we do the sentence is to show how that paragraph relates to the big thesis. And so the sentences are kind of like a microcosm of that. So now we have to ask ourselves, like, what does this tiny sentence do to attribute to the broader goal of the paragraph and the broader goal of the thesis? So think about, what did you think the goal of this final paragraph was? And then why did the author put it here to help that goal? Let's look at that. We'll come back at 11:49. And again, put it in the chat. Put your answer in the chat. We know it's coming from the third paragraph, so you don't have to write that, but try to find like the sentence that you think really like expounded upon that. All right. So we're looking, the answer to this becomes D. And I mean, like the jerk way, there's this, I'm gonna try to find them, but there's this group, I'll bring it for the next time. I know I've said it before, but like the name is escaping me, but essentially like there is this guy on YouTube who essentially they have a like a reading comprehension, like I think, I don't know if it's a boot camp or if it's just like a series of like asynchronous videos that you do, but he goes more to strategy there. But on YouTube, like he goes through a lot of these passages and he looks at the questions and then he's like, this is the answer, and the answer comes from the sentence, and you feel like a complete idiot because it's written right there. So in this one, like this one kind of made me chuckle because the sentence starts with, for example, the imprisoned royalist, Madame de la Villeroy, and the answer is, provide an example. So like at the very least, like that should have kind of been your cue of what's happening. But if you didn't catch up on that, which is totally fine, even without the for example, we should know this because the author, if we read the sentence before, on the whole, women memoirs exhibit a variety of personalities, so we're making a broader statement, and then she's offered as like a smaller like happening of those variety of personalities. So that's our example. It's not LSAT lab. It's like, it's not anyone big. It's like a very tiny, like a tinier program. I'll try to find it and tell everyone, but it's a lot of like the same thing where it's asking you to go back and find the proof. And then this guy finds it in like one sentence and it's exactly the answer. So it's fun and it's encouraging because it kind of shows you that like it is there. They're not like, we're not lying to you when we're saying every answer choice is supported, but it's infuriating because when you're like, oh, I can't believe I missed it. It was right there. What was I doing? Okay. According to the passage, more. So this is an instance of explicit proof. So if you see something that according to the passage or the author says, or the passage says, like that should be your cue that we're looking for explicit proof. So essentially, like sometimes, and this is the first paragraph, the first passage, so maybe like they will be a little nicer, but usually this doesn't mean that like the exact text is going to come from the passage, but like you better have something that is saying the same exact thing, just in different like words, and that's your answer. So we're looking for direct proof. According to the passage, more of the published women's memoirs of the French Revolution were written by royalists than by Republicans because, okay. So there's two strategies with this. So you should either like in your brain think about like where did I like learn about royalists versus Republicans, and if you really don't know, this is a great time to whip out our Control F. Lucy, your name's in there because I was looking for your name in an email, so don't be too creeped out. We could type in Republican, Republican, and then that'll lead us. So that's a great way to double check, and you can use Control F on the test. So same drill, 1155. Give me the paragraph, the sentence, and then your answer choice as to why you chose it. Yay, and everyone did it a minute early, which I also hope like shows you that like I know right now we're kind of we're dragging everything out because we're in a class format, but it's like once you know where to look, once you kind of know what you're like, once you know where to look, once you have your roadmap, like you're able to answer these so quickly, and your accuracy is great. Everyone got it right. The proof obviously comes from this final sentence. So I hope this has been like a good confidence booster for everyone because you're all doing great. And you got that in 2 minutes. So obviously, like we can't spend 2 minutes on every single question and then like 5 minutes on the passage, but I hope that's like a good step to show you that it will get faster and that you do have what it takes and you're not taking an exorbitant amount of time. All right, based on the passage. So this is again, this is explicit because it's based on the passage. Oh wait, sorry, I'm a big fat liar. So based on the passage, which of the following views can most reasonably be attributed? Okay. So this is an implied thing, like it's not there, but like what do we think, what do we think would be like make sense? We have enough proof to justify to the historians mentioned in the first sentence of the second paragraph. So this one, they're being a little nicer because they're specifically telling you where to go, but this is another like common reading comp question where they're going to pick like one person's perspective. And so it'll either be the author, in which case you need to, depending on what type of passage you read, you need to ask yourself, like, where is the author's voice most present? So if it was for this passage, the author's voice would be the most present in the final paragraph when they pick a side. If it was persuasive, it's going to be the whole thing, really like that first thesis. And then if it's informative, usually you're not going to see like too many like author's questions. But for informative, you're looking for any time the author maybe like cracked and showed something that wasn't neutrality or something like positive that enhances the message. So we know where to look. So we're looking for something that can most reasonably be attributed to the historian. So how I recommend is think about who they're asking and try to like ask yourself, like, what do I know about this group? So in this case, like, what do we know about these historians? And then look at the answer choices and try to align and support. And then also figure out what side of the argument they're on. So we'll come back to 1159. So find your proof, your answer, your proof, and then obviously it's going to come from the second passage. All right, so this one we were sort of stuck between, I think this one was one of the trickier ones we had. So the big thing that we know about these historians is that they question the reliability of the documents, and they justify that by saying the memoirs were written so long after the events they described, and there's memory loss, all of that. So we're looking for something that maybe says like these memoirs maybe aren't accurate, or maybe something that says a memoir that's written like that's actually written during the time period is going to be more accurate than one published later, as we're seeing. Okay, so let's look at that and remembering our wrong answer buckets. Royalist memoirs of the French Revolution are more factually reliable than our Republican memoirs of the same period. So that's going to be wrong as a matter of fact, because the idea behind, well, first off, like some historians, like these historians aren't necessarily focused on the Republican versus Royalist like political issues. They're more focused on the time thing. So I guess we can just say it's out of scope. But even if we were a little confused on that one, this final sentence, the ones written by Royalists were published under the monarchy's aegis. In contrast, Republican memoirists who supported risk political sanctions. So hypothetically, like the Republican would probably be more accurate because we're only hearing one side. Republican memoirs are less distorted by partisan biases than our Royalist memoirs. Again, we're falling into the same trap as answer one, where this author hasn't like said which one's going to be more accurate. The author is just saying that we're mostly going to get more of one side. as opposed to the other. Like it doesn't have to do with reliability. For all we know, both of them are inaccurate because they're both going to be biased. It's more about the idea of we have more work that support that are anti the revolution because those people felt more like safe to write them. So B doesn't get the job done either. Many memoirs, okay, so we like the vague terms of many of the French Revolution published during the restored monarchy likely contain factual inaccuracies. Yeah, so these historians are just saying that these memoirs that were written after, so during the restored monarchy, contain factual inaccuracies. Yeah, that's essentially what the sentence is saying. So C looks good. Let's look at D. Many memoirs of the French Revolution. Okay, we like the vagueness. Contain accounts of events that are not skewed by the biases of the authors. Again, this author doesn't really care about bias. They're more talking about the length of the period listed, but also like, do we really think that this author is trying to say that like many memoirs don't contain bias of the author? Like, I mean, I don't think we have enough proof to really say that because I think the argument would be like, isn't everything a little biased? So that's taking us out of scope. So we're not going to go down that rabbit hole. Many memoirs of the French Revolution consist mostly. So see in this one, this is an example of something that's going to be overly broad. Many memoirs consist mostly. So even though it starts vague, which we like, and starts weak, the fact that it says mostly really says that the author would have to say that like most of what we have of unverifiable accounts of certain events. That's not true. Like mostly of unverifiable, we talk about ways here to verify what happened. So it has to be C. Okay. Based on the passage, which one of the following most accurately states the criterion the scholars referred to in the third sentence of the second paragraph used to judge the credibility of memoir's depiction of events? Okay, so based on the passage, and we're looking for what accurately states a criteria that the scholars referred to in the third sentence. So this is one where we're looking for explicit proof because it's specifically pinpointing. So this is the skill they're testing here is like, are you able to identify information quickly? So again, I'm only going to give 2 minutes for this one because I think this one should be pretty straightforward because they told us where to look. So find the answer and then what sentence supports it. We'll be back at 12:05. All right, so everyone picked something different for this one. So remember, when they're asking you something that's based on the passage and they're looking for something explicit, they're basically looking like, how well are you able to follow directions and identify? So based on the passage, which one of the following most accurately states a criterion that scholars referred to in the third sentence of the second paragraph to use to judge the credibility of a memoir's depiction of events known only to its author. Okay, so we know that there's two criteria. The first is for major public happenings. So these are the two criteria. So we know that we're looking here. And so we have two criteria. So we have two options. One is if it's public happenings, cross verification. Second, this is for the personal events, like is it plausible, known of character. So these are the two camps. So based on this, based on the question, we have to ask ourselves, are they asking about, which one are they asking about? So reread this and try to identify, like, are they asking about the public happenings criteria, or are they asking for the personal criteria? So in the chat, put either public or personal in terms of like which one you think the author is asking us about. Yeah, Charlotte, you're exactly right. They are asking us for personal. So if they're asking us for personal, we know we're looking at the second criteria. We're not looking for the first. So we're looking at regarding the truth of the personal events to the author. So again, we're limiting ourselves even further. So now we know the answer has to come from here. Second, regarding the truth of personal events known only to the author, more subjective guidelines must be used. Are there internal verifications within a text that suggest the author is describing a plausible sequence of events and acting in accord with what is known of the writer's character? So we know, because it's based on the passage question, the answer either has to be plausibility or acting in accord with their character. So let's go. The depiction should appear consistent with the author's personality. Okay, yeah, that's one of our predictions. We're looking for plausibility or in line with their character. The depiction should contain demonstrable factual accuracies. Nope, that is the first one, and they're not asking us about the public happenings, the first one. C, the depiction should have been verified shortly after being written. That's not even one of our criteria. The depiction should not be part of a partisan account. That's not in our criteria, out of scope. The depiction should preserve a particular picture of the past. Again, that's not like, that's out of scope. If anything, it's maybe going for the public happenings, but they're not asking us about that. So the answer has to be A. Okay. So we have about 7 minutes left. So before I kind of like segue into our next, which I think what we're gonna do is I would like us to read the first paragraph, just because we only have one minute left. I would like everyone to read the first paragraph of passage 4, the one we were going to do today, and then try to identify, so do your prediction of what type of passage it is, what is the thesis, and then try to find the answer to the main point question, since we know that our thesis comes from our main point. And then after that, I'll like pause for questions because that should take us to time. So I'll give 4 minutes for this one. So read the first paragraph, try to identify the correct answer, and I'll scroll down in a minute to see E. All right, so let's go just to make sure that we're ending on time. So as we can see, like, again, our thought process when we're identifying is one, do we have a clear, like, author thesis? Like, has the author really made their opinion known? I think when we look at this, we're lacking that. We're lacking some universal idea. Like, we're really only talking about Ronald Dworkin and his idea. We don't get the author's opinion. So persuasive out the window. So now we're stuck between informative and cost benefit. So our next question is the author taking ownership of this information, or is the author attributing it to someone else? And as we can see here, there's never an instance where the author is, there's never an instance where like we're not really learning about like a big topic. The author's just more talking about like Ronald Dworkin and his theory. He's not really creating like a bigger account. So this is going to be informative, and it's teaching, the author's teaching us about Ronald Dworkin's argument and his theory, because we're not debating anything. The author's just telling us about Dworkin. So this is informative. And then the answer to this, so we're looking for something that basically says like Dworkin argues that legal positivism shouldn't be fully embraced, but they can't use natural law where it's only based on more like morality. So when looking for the answer that best epitomizes that, natural law, this is wrong as a matter of fact, because he says this is an impermissible form of judicial activism. So he doesn't like natural law at all. Dworkin holds that judicial interpretation should not be based solely on identifying a consensus or solely on moral intuition, but should be consistent with the reasoning. Okay, this is a little closer because he's anti this theory, but he's also anti-natural law. So we're looking for like something in the middle. But the author hasn't like Dworkin hasn't necessarily like picked something in the middle. The author has just sort of said like both of these are bad. Dworkin argues that the internal logic of the law should generally guide judges, except in instances and judges have strong moral intuitions. No, he says no, moral intuition should not be guiding. Dworkin's theory of legal interpretation is based on borrowing equally from natural law and legal positivism. So this looks good, but if we're comparing B to D, we don't know that it borrows equally. We just know that he doesn't like it being completely one and completely the other. So if it had taken the word equally out, I think this would be a much stronger answer choice, but because it has equally, we don't know if it's equal. That has to be wrong. So this would be an example of like an under-inclusive answer. Like it's asking us to like leap on a detail we don't have enough proof to leap on. Dworkin validates judges' dependence on moral intuition reason, but only in cases where a social consensus is not present. No, he never validates that. So it's B. Okay. I'm gonna stop sharing. Okay, so thank you everyone. So if you would like to work on D on your own, I hope that this was a good example of kind of when you're looking for proof, like a good way to sort of like get yourself to really make sure that you're understanding what proof for a reading comp passage looks like, where it comes from, what it resembles. So if you have any questions, I'm going to put my number and my email in the chat for everyone. Here's my email. And then here's my number. So if you think of anything, feel free to reach out. But if not, thank you everyone for coming today on this long weekend. I appreciate it. I hope this was helpful. And I'll stick around for a couple minutes if anyone has anything to ask. But if not, enjoy your Sunday and enjoy your Monday off if you get Monday off. Yeah.
Thank you, Katie.
No problem. Have a good one. Yeah, Lucy, no problem. So just whenever you need to, just reach out. But yeah, I hope everything's going well in your job search, and I have full faith that you're going to be fine. So whenever you're ready, it's okay. But the test isn't going anywhere. I'm not going anywhere. You are good to go. I promise. All right, Lucy, I'm gonna end, but if you think of anything, feel free to email or text, okay? Bye, enjoy your weekend.